So anyhow, we're in the book of Judges. Hopefully you got to read some of it. In the case of one of my outstanding Bible students over here, Don Matua, he's already read it, and he's over into 1 Samuel, right? What do you think about them Judges, man? Some crazy stuff happens, right? A lot of crazy stuff. A lot of smiting and smoting. Oh, yes. Yes. And so Judges, it's a tough time. And to just summarize why it's a tough time is because people did what was right in their own eyes. They just pretty much did what they wanted. You know, which is amazing because I am a child of the 70s, you know. I was a hippie kid, you know, and of course, the idea back then, oh, who's doing the computer today? Who? Quigley? I've got the thingy here that needs to get loaded. Do you need to? I can't throw it that far, but I bet you Brian will deliver it because he's an awesome dude. But anyhow, you know, the whole idea that I grew up with is real freedom is you just do whatever it is you feel like doing. You do whatever you want. To put it in another phrase, do whatever is right in your own eyes. We have an entire book, an entire section of history where a group of people did what was right in their own eyes. And every single time, without exception, turns into what? Chaos is a good word, but it's not even a strong enough word. It turns into total disaster. Total disaster, misery, grief, suffering. Yeah. Yeah, so the bad guys oppress what are supposed to be the good guys, but they're not really good guys anymore, and we'll see why in chapter 1 and verse 10. 10? No. Chapter 2 and verse 10. Whichever it is. It's over there in some verse something. Yeah, it's 2 and verse 10. Anyhow, we'll get to it in a minute. But anyhow, it does not end well for the people of Israel. There's a sermon in that, Mikey. You can preach that next Sunday if you want. You know, when we don't follow God's guidance, instructions, boundaries, our life becomes unmanageable. So freedom is not doing whatever I want to do. Freedom is total and complete submission to the will and the desires of God. Then I become free from so many things. So many things. So anyhow, yeah, so you see, Judges is about people who did what was right in their own eyes. They were an authority unto themselves. Hey, they were like the hippie movement. Hey, man, do whatever feels good. And so I got you, as those of you who are so observant, another handout. Why did I get this? Okay, last week you had a handout that showed another way of portraying the pattern, the cycle in Judges. Okay, this one's a little different. But I like the listing of the judges better in this handout, and that you have your judges here, kind of a brief description of them and the years that they served. It's interesting to know the amount of time, because when you're reading it, you think, okay, Othniel, he delivered the people, they're living on the mountaintop, and then next thing you know, they're disobedient, and we have Ehud come on the scene. No, there was 40 years. I mean, there's a whole generation, a period of time. So you got to kind of take that time into consideration when you see this pattern take place. Now, sometimes they cycled quickly, but sometimes it was quite a bit of time in between. But you have Israel disobeying. They become oppressed. And generally that means that there's a nation that has invaded and is oppressing them. Okay? Could you imagine? Well, I tell you what, if we continue on the trajectory that we're going in this particular country we're living in, that cycle might happen here. But just try to imagine because of idolatry, because of people disregarding the will of God, and that we had an invading nation come in. We've never experienced that, where there's a nation that's in our country, oppressing us, telling us what we can and cannot do, taking our money and all that kind of thing. Well, that's what happened to Israel. And then Israel cries out to God, deliver us. And so God raises up a deliverer, and we call them judges or a leader, and they're delivered. And they're at peace. They have prosperity. All is well. And then what happens? How quickly we forget, PJ says. That's right. They forget God. What do I need God for? Everything's going great. I'm doing fine. And pretty soon God, it's a slow fade. And then boom. Next thing you know, they're out worshiping Baal. Which, by the way, mark this down. We're going to talk quite extensively about Baal worship. How many of you are familiar with Baal worship? B-A-A-L worship. Just a little bit there. I want to get into some in-depth discussion about Baal worship. Anybody ever done a real in-depth study? Nancy, have you? Can you, well, I'm not going to put you on the spot. Let's put it this way. Any of you worship Baal today? Know anybody that worships Baal today? You would say no. But I'm going to show you, as we move into our study, that there are aspects and principles of Baal worship that are very much well and alive today. And especially in the worship of Molech. Anybody heard of that? Worship of Molech? And the parallels between Molech worship back in the time of the kings and the judges and today. This is quite grisly. Quite grisly. But we'll get into that as we go along. Yeah, there were some very bad times. And it all begins with the people of God disobeying God. And if you had a friend that wanted an answer to this question, what would you say? Why should we obey God? Why? God's got all these rules and stuff. And he just likes to, he's a killjoy, He just wants to keep me from having fun. So why should I obey God? What would you say? How would you answer that? I'm just curious. Your thoughts. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious what your thoughts would be. If that's how people saw God, what would you say? Okay. Someday you'll be judged and give an account. Okay. How about anybody else? Any other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. You feel more secure. Very good. Very good. Oh, yeah. I am. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't help it. Some things I can't. She brings up an interesting point. Now, I don't know how many of you follow, go the speed limit. I don't know. And I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to. But I'll use myself as an example, okay? Cruising down the highway. Let's say we're going to Arkansas, I'm cruising down Highway 57. And all of a sudden, a police officer shows up in my rearview mirror. I don't know about what's your first reaction? What do you do when you're driving? What? Yeah. You slow down? You look at your speedometer, right? So let's say the speed limit is say 55, and you look down, and you're going 85. Do you feel very secure at this moment? No, and I don't either. Begin to hyperventilate, begin to figure out how can I slow down without hitting my brakes and, that kind of thing. Already thinking up excuses for when I get pulled over and, I got 15 children at home and I got to feed them, or something. But here, let me change the scenario. You're going down the highway. There's a police behind you. You immediately get that kind of panic feeling, and you look at the speedometer and you're doing 53 and a 55. Now how do you feel? Much more confident, right? Much more secure. And I like what she said, that when we're within the boundaries of God's direction, we feel secure. We feel at peace. We're not trying to sneak around something. Okay, so that's a really good answer. How about any other thoughts? Yes? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a cool picture. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of analogies, but each one is based upon our benefit. That's what you're saying, our benefit. I love that center line. Yeah, I was really insecure going down this road until they painted the lines back on. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, people are all over that road. Some are clear over on the side, some are way over across the middle. Did you experience that? But when they put that line down the middle to show you need to be on this side, you need to be on that side, I feel a lot more secure. You're still only separated by 2 or 3 feet. He's going 55, you're going 55 the opposite direction. You put the two together, that's disaster. But I feel comfortable, I feel secure when they're on their side of the road, I'm on my side of the road. And so, that is what God's desire is. He created this world. He knows what is in our best interest, and those things are all created for our best interest. And it's all motivated by His love for us. And that's what we need to share. And yes, I'm afraid of getting the ticket. And who wants to get the ticket? I don't want to get a ticket. I don't know anybody, that gets pulled over. Yeah, man, I went 85 so I could get a ticket. It's about time you got here. Yeah, give me my ticket. I love it. Give it to me. How much do I have to pay? $150? Oh, that's great. I want to pay it. No, I don't know anybody wants that, right? But we push the envelope because we want something else. We want to get there quicker. Uh-huh. Never know. There. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What did he say? You're going too slow. Okay. You need to pick it up. You're going too slow, and I couldn't see your head above the headrest. I thought maybe the kid was driving. No, I don't know. That's funny. You're going too slow. Yeah. Going too slow. Oh, that's funny. Okay, so as we look at this pattern in Judges, we're going to see that eventually the place where there's a deliverer right there on the bottom, right? A deliverer. Now, as you look at the Bible, I mean, from the Old Testament to the New, it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. It really is. And this is one of the most powerful places where we have all these different judges, these deliverers, and they're all a portrait of Jesus, our deliverer. Okay? Even Samson, with his faults. And remember, they're humans, and the analogy breaks down as far as the mistakes that they make. But the fact of the matter is, this pattern is us. And the deliverer is Jesus. And so we have all these different models of Jesus, our Savior. There are 17 judges in all, and each one of them is either a warrior or ruler, a prophet or a priest. And again, what a model of Jesus, because as you look at them in their totality, you have the threefold office of Jesus: prophet, priest, king. And so we have this model of Jesus as prophet, priest, king through all these different judges. And did any of you read through, besides, well, I'll start with Don. Out of the different judges that you saw, did you have one that really piqued your interest? I don't know if I want to say your favorite judge, maybe. Name one immediately. Who comes to mind first? Gideon. Okay, Gideon. Yeah, those are the guy. He's the guy that goes around the hotels and puts Bibles in. Yeah, that Gideon guy. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, you can't help but like Gideon, and I can't wait till we get there and study him, because, again, he's just like us, and we'll see that when we get to Gideon. How about anybody else? Do you have a judge that immediate comes to mind, one that you either despised or liked, or just first judge comes to your mind? Deborah, of course, spoken by a woman there, yeah. And I love Deborah, and we're going to look at that, especially, one of my hobbies that I like to ride is the role of women in New Testament church, and the role of women basically in the Bible, because for many years it's been, oppressed, if you will, pushed down. And how can you do that? And look at Deborah. And what a great story that was, and what a great leader she was. And she put a little bit of a shame on her right-hand man there, but anyhow, and deservedly so. Deservedly so, because he lacked the faith to take the lead that he should have been taking. Okay? Anybody else? Another judge. How about Ehud? Who? Ehud, yeah. That's gross. That'd be a gross one. We'll talk about that when we get there. His claim to fame is he was a left-handed guy. So, southpaws unite, So Ehud. Jephthah. Anybody remember Jephthah? Making his rash promise. Anybody ever make a rash promise? Don't raise your hand, but you think about that. He made a rash promise, and it came back to haunt him. Of course, we all know Samson, right? Right? Yeah. Big muscle-bound guy. Yeah, very vain. And anyhow, we'll see what gets. So anyhow, you have these different judges. Othniel, nobody ever remembers Othniel. Some remember Ehud. Shamgar, some remember him. Deborah, very, very cool gal. Gideon, what's Gideon known for? What's the putting out the fleece, right? Putting out the fleece. Tola, no one remembers Tola. Jair, but Jephthah, the rash promise. Isbin, nobody remembers Isbin or Elon or Abdon, but Samson, of course, everybody remembers Samson, the big muscle-bound guy. Okay. What about Abimelech? Yeah. Well, like I said, there's 17. And by the way, there are some who have some debates. Is Samuel a judge? Yes, he is a judge, but he's also a prophet. And so I don't have them all listed on here, but these are the major ones. We'll look at some other ones that are not listed here, because like I said, there's about 17 in all, depending on how you classify them as judges or not. We'll get into that as we go along. All right, so that gets us right into chapter 1. And if you read chapter 1, we are connecting this with what? The book that came before. So we had, let's go all the way back to Israel is in the land of Egypt, right? They're into slavery, and God provided them what? A deliverer. His name was Moses. I like saying that. Moses. Oh, Moses. Because I watched that Moses, with Charlton Heston. Moses. And the Ten Commandments. That's right. Moses. But now Moses died, and he passed the baton off to Joshua. And then Joshua hands it off to Caleb. Remember the two cool guys? Vera and I are going to have another baby. We're going to call him Joshua or Caleb. Cool, strong names. So what was Joshua doing when he had the baton handed off to him? Moses couldn't do it because of something he did in the wilderness wandering. He couldn't go into the what? Promised land. But Joshua would take the people of Israel and, fight and secure the land for the different people of Israel. So this is where we're at after Joshua. We've got the period of the judges. All right? And so you've got these different tribes coming to take over their rightful inheritance as described by God. Caleb said, give me this hill country, right? Hebron, the big hill country. I'm 80 years old. I'm still a strong guy. I love Caleb because I want to be that guy. Don't you, Jamie? 80 years old, still as strong as I was when I was in my 20s. Give me it. I'm ready for a fight. I'll beat them giants. I ain't worried about them. Bring it on. And he got his property. He gets it, you know. But some weren't so faithful. Some weren't so faithful. If God has promised it, it's going to happen. But some didn't believe it, right? You remember the whole story and why they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Because they sent in the spies and they came back and didn't believe, and you know that whole story. But anyhow, they finally are coming in to the promised land, and they have to extract the Canaanites. Now this is where you get some of your smiting and your smoting and all that kind of stuff in this war. Why is it important that the Canaanites get kicked out of this area where the Israelites are going to come? Now the Israelites are God's covenant people, right? This is going to be their territory. There are some people possessing the land right now, and they got to go. Why do they got to go? I bet you Nancy knows. Why, Nancy? Yeah. Yeah. So, she said two things very important. Number one, they got to go because they're evil. Now, God has used nations to punish nations. Am I right? You've read the Old Testament? Okay? Of course, the real question is, does he still do that today? And that's a whole other story. But let's suffice it to say, in the Old Testament, for God's will is that these evil nations be destroyed and be replaced with Israel. Okay. That's the premise. Whether you agree with it or not, that's another story. That's the fact. This is written down in the history of Israel. From Joshua all the way through Judges. Okay. Now that being said, why is it important then that those people not live together? And that was her second point. If these people are not extracted from the land, they will influence them in their pagan. And by the way, we'll cover, like I said, we'll cover some of this. You know, you think, oh, they're just bad people. You know, like people from Ohio. You know, they're just bad people. You know, and no, they're not just bad people. And that's just a joke. You understand? I love people in Ohio, except Ohio State fans. That's another story. But anyhow, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? It's not just that we dislike these folks because, you know, they don't do things like... They're evil. They're evil. They're evil beyond what you can think of. Think of the most evil nation you can think of today. Right? Whatever nation popped to your head, whatever kind of people popped in your head, multiply that by 100. That's these people. Multiply it. Multiply it. They were absolutely godless, wicked, evil people. Okay? And so... not only is Israel going to get their own country that's going to be in covenant relationship with God, these people are going to be punished. And they need to be driven out. So as we get into chapter 1, we see this process beginning where the people are driven out. But you guys have already read the story. Are all the people driven out? No, they're not. And how does that come to play on the nation of Israel? Thorn in their side the whole time. Now, let me just jump over to application. You know me, Mr. Application. This Judges thing wasn't written just so we can go back and dust off some real interesting history and say, oh, wow, that's cool. No, we'll learn from it. Because if it's just about old history and it doesn't apply to us, then lighten your Bible, man. It'd go from 10 pounds to like 1.5 pounds real quick. But no, there's absolutely wonderful information there on how God works with his covenant people, how he will fight for his people, and there's just so much direction that we can get from that. Well, the application here is that, where was I? I forgot where I was at. Yeah, I'm on application. But what? Oh, yeah. Okay, so doing what God wants us to do. Okay, so think about the things. So these guys didn't do what God wanted them to do, and they suffered the result of it. Think about where God has directed us. Remember, we talked about this last week in the sermon about doing the will of God and how that benefits us when we do the will of God. And when we don't, it doesn't. So, and we can know what his will is. It's not like, golly, I wonder what God's will is, huh? You know, let's see, should I go to church today or not? Oh, no, let's go to the lake instead. Should I, do this thing or not? And anyhow, what is God's will? What is God's will? And so when we do, and we're participating in the will of God, we're blessed. When we don't, we're not. And so think about jumping into that application area. What area of life is not in the will of God? Now, I'm not talking about anybody in this room, but I'm telling you, after 32 years of ministry, I see this the cycle over and over again. And I work with people, and their life is absolute H-E double hockey sticks, H-E double hockey sticks. Terrible. Can I say hell in Bible class? Fear's not here. Their life is hell. Okay? Oh, she come from behind the wall. Not the old comfort. Oh, look at the eye I'm getting too. I'm in so much trouble. I am so busted. But it is so true. I just tell my grandchildren I'm speaking King James. But it's so true. Isn't it? And then who do they blame for their life being H-E double hockey sticks? God, does it fall? Well, let me see. You've lived in complete contrary to the will of God, but you expect the 100% blessings of God. How do you figure? Now, I'm not saying that to him. I'm thinking it, But there is a pattern here. Oh my. We're going to see this. This is the theme of Judges. And the application for us today is don't just leave it back in the Old Testament. This is the theme for life today. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that you can be in the total will of God and bad stuff happen. I mean, look at the cross. Who was more in the will of God than Jesus Christ? And they nailed him to a cross. But I'm telling you, ultimately, always, without exception, to be in the will of God will ultimately be in your best interests. Always. Always. And doesn't mean that maybe necessarily bad things won't happen to you, but either it will go better for you, not as bad as a situation that would be otherwise, and in many cases you don't experience a lot of the trauma and the tragedy and the problems if you are living contrary to his will. So there's a wonderful principle here through Judges that has absolute application in our lives. So just real quickly, because I have 1 minute left, I've got to get a Caleb quote in here in chapter 1, verse 12, as they're beginning to make this move into Israel. And actually, I begin in verse 11. From there they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Achsah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sepher. So Othniel, who we'll hear about here in a little bit, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and Caleb gave his daughter to him. This was a very common practice in that time, this reward for the warrior. And in this case, it was the daughter in marriage. And she came to Othniel, and she urged him to ask her father for a field, so the property, and so on. So moving on down to verse 17, the men of Judah went with the Simeonites. They were victorious, and they attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. And then the men of Judah, they were also very successful. But, now we're going to move into the buts. But they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. As Moses promised, Hebron was given to Caleb. Remember we talked about Caleb? You can study about that in Numbers. His mighty, bold, faithful proclamation. And but the Benjamites, who can remember what Benjamin means in Hebrew? Did anybody remember me saying it? Ben means son. There, he's got it. Son of my right arm, my strength. Ben-Hamin, that's how you say it in Hebrew. Son of my right arm. And guess what Ben-Hamin, that they failed to dislodge the Jebusites, the folks hanging out in Jerusalem. So there was a lot. And anyhow, the rest of chapter 1 is about failure. They didn't do it. They didn't fulfill the driving the people from the land. And then we'll pick up next week with Othniel as our first judge. Our first judge. We'll see how that goes. Okay, please read Judges if you haven't already done so. And we'll pick it up next week. Thank you so much.